So, the long life cycle of a game. This is me. I'm Philip Buchanan. I'm originally from Christchurch, and I studied computer engineering at the University of Canterbury. I worked at Stickmin Studios way back in the day, and we made this ridiculous game called Dock Clock and the Toasted Sandwich of Time. After that, I transplanted myself up to Sweden, where I worked with Lunds Universitet's graphics research group, doing visual style programming and a lot of research for my doctorate. I used this background to get a job in Montreal, in Quebec, in Canada, and I worked for Square Enix in Montreal. I worked on Hitman Go, which won a bunch of awards for our fairly small team, 10-person team, and I was the graphics programmer and gameplay programmer for Lara Croft Go. I also did some of the tech art and programming for dissects Go, so they're the 3 mobile games based on, obviously, the large franchises. After working at Square Enix for nearly 4 years, I founded my own tiny little solo studio at Anecdotal, moved back to New Zealand very recently, and in 2018 launched 39 Days to Mars, which is a 2-player cooperative platform puzzle game. In the exhibition, you can find my newest second title, Watch This Space, which is an arcade game mashup. So all this to say is I've worked on a few different titles and very different things, different sizes, different teams, very different approaches. Some of these were carefully planned out with like really strong project direction. Others just kind of evolved based on a general idea. But there's one thing that all these projects have in common, and that is that we, the development team, we all expected them to take less time and to ship earlier than they actually did. I won't say they launched late, because as you go through development, you reevaluate your progress and you update your estimates and you don't announce a launch date until you're roughly sure you're going to ship. But our expectations as a development team at the beginning of a project were very much out of line with the time it ends up taking. So, as an example, I'm going to use 39 Days to Mars. This is obviously my largest solo project. I started it in around 2014, where I kickstarted it. And during the Kickstarter, I was like, thank you for supporting. You'll get a copy of the game once it's released. It's this tiny little puzzle game. I'm just going to make a few little puzzles, draw some art, and it'll be out the next year, 2015. Yes. So despite being a solo project, I actually tracked the time I spent on most of the things I worked on. So I can tell you exactly where all that time went. It started in 2013, the prototype, November, December, and this should be 2021. I still was working on it in January this year, but I released the last of the console ports. It was roughly 4 years of full-time work spread out over this 7-year period. And to be fair, the actual time I spent making the game, programming the puzzles, drawing the art, it was about a year. The problem is that 12 months is actually spread out over this time and interspersed with all these other little things. Fulfillment, playtesting, outreach, store page, sales strategy, bug fixing, voice acting, localization, compatibility, certification, live support, marketing. I knew some of these things were going to happen. Others totally blindsided me. But it's worth keeping all this in mind. So I'm going to talk briefly about all of these. These things that, took up the 4 years. The things that aren't really developing the game. Though I would argue that is developing the game. It's just, it doesn't feel like it. The problem is subconsciously, when we talk about game development, what we're really thinking about is the bit that the player interacts with. If you ask a project manager or an artist what they're working on, they'll tell you about the game, about the character that runs around in this cool world and the story. And then you ask what they're actually doing right now, and there's a good chance they'll be working on one of those other tasks. And even if you have dedicated team members, all these things still affect them. Your programmer still probably integrates the store API. Your artist will be spending time on marketing assets. And if you're a solo developer like I am, you do everything. So that this presentation doesn't take 4 years, I'm going to go over these really quickly. So if you have questions, obviously there's time after, and just come and hunt me down and ask me questions. So this is the development timeline. It starts with a block at the beginning, prototyping. It took me 12 weeks, more or less. There's so many ways to approach this. You can make a game jam and see how that goes. You can draw things out in paper. You can throw it together in Photoshop and move things around with the mouse. And I did all of these and had a rough idea that I wanted to make this game. So I kickstarted it. Back in 2014, the Kickstarter was fairly easy to do. You'd throw up a page, you didn't have to do a lot of marketing, it just kind of worked. But the Kickstarter campaign runs for 4 weeks. You do a lot of content production. You talk to your Kickstarter backers, you're constantly churning out milestones, you're not working on the game, you're working on the Kickstarter. And then if you do physical rewards, you have to ship them. Don't do this. People love them, people back your project, but it takes another 4 weeks to deal with the fallout from your Kickstarter project. And if you're smart enough not to do Kickstarter, you're probably going to be spending longer than 8 weeks trying to find a publisher. So then you have a bit of funding, you've got a prototype, you make the game. It's easy, it's fun, it takes a year, cool. This is all roughly in chronological order, but really these are interspersed. You spend an hour here working on one thing and an hour here working on another. You don't sit down for a week and work on one of these pieces of the project. That's all mixed up. So this is roughly chronological, put together so it's easy to understand, but everything's mixed up. After you prototype, you made the game, and you should probably see how it goes. Is it fun? Are people interested in it? Playtesting. So I did a lot of this. I was lucky enough to work in a co-working space in Montreal that helped run public playtests every month. So 36 playtests, 36 months in a row. I took notes, I fixed the bugs, I came back, I made things better. All in all, it was probably about 12 weeks of full-time work to run the playtests, and that's at a minimum. So now we've got a fun game. It's mostly fixed. We can polish it up, make it a bit shiny, add some special effects, and we're ready to ship. We're 1 3/4 of a year into our 1-year project already. It's about time we shipped. But during this time, you've also been doing quite a lot of writing because the game's taken 1 3/4 years. The Kickstarter backers are worried about the fact you've vanished. So you've been replying to comments and you've been posting updates. You've been writing weekly blog posts about the progress. You've taken hours and hours on social media and in writing. There we go. Streamer outreach, interviews, news outlets. There's probably 8 weeks of full-time work in here. But now we can launch the game. Or, I don't know, maybe because we've been talking to people and the characters are some of the best parts of the game, we should give them some voice acting. And it's pretty easy to do, right? You give the dialogue to someone, they read it out, and you play it at the same time as it shows in the game. No problem. The problem is if you have 10,000 words of text and you've got a good voice actor, they'll do iterations. And you get 3 or 4 versions of each line of dialogue that you have to listen through and select and integrate into the game, and it takes 8 weeks. And while we've been doing our outreach and talking to people, we've found out that there's a really strong German following in the game. Not surprising, it's an adventure game, it's the perfect fit. We should probably localize it so more people can play it from this audience. So you send your 10,000 words out to the translator, you integrate it, you work on localization. But we're ready to launch. We're going to launch. So we throw it up on Steam, and make a little store page for it. It's pretty easy. It's actually great. They have a checklist of all the things you have to do. You bring it up and you work on it. You put in the basic info and the descriptions. You work on the content settings, your ratings, your release date, your system requirements, your 5 or more screenshots, capture images, library assets, support info, developer names, tags, community capsule. And each one of these, community capsule, by the way, is this thing. It appears up in the corner on the Steam page. And this one, which is like slightly bigger, so you have to make a second version. And that's on the other page. And then there's the small one for lists and the slightly smaller one for smaller lists. And this thing for the redo of the library, and this one for the left banner, and this one for the right banner, and this is the header image, and the community icon client, icon cloud save, Steam achievements, workshop, local pricing set, publish pricing, release date, trailer upload, app configuration upload, build configure file structure. Suddenly, 8 weeks seems really, 6 weeks seems incredibly reasonable. So we can launch, I think. No, wait, we probably should tell people we've made a game. So marketing, 2 weeks. Don't do that. I put 2 weeks here because I don't particularly enjoy marketing, and I didn't have the time to do a lot of marketing, so I paid a lot of money for someone else to do all my marketing. 3 months, roughly full-time work, spread out over the development cycle. If you don't have that, you need to spend 3 months of your time to do the marketing, at least. Please do marketing if you have one takeaway from this talk. Please do marketing. And then you launch. You push the button, it goes live. You push refresh on your sales page for like a week solid. And then it's done. It's out. It's done. And then you start getting key requests from people. It's great. People like your game. They want to play it. They want to stream it and show it to their audience. And they're like, hey, I have a YouTube channel. I've got 1,000 followers. Please send me a copy of the game. It's great. You're like, OK, I'll send one to you. And the next email comes in, and page 1 of 16,000. It takes quite a while. If you only spend 5 minutes talking to each person, going to their YouTube channel, and make sure they're not who they are, who they say they are, that they actually have the audience they say they've got, and they're actually going to play your game. 5 minutes times 1,614 adds up to at least 3 weeks of work spread out over post-launch. And it's not bug-free. Games are never bug-free. So you spend at least 8 weeks post-launch fixing all the little issues. I was really lucky because I did so much playtesting for years and years that there weren't many of these. It was a really smooth launch, and it still took 8 weeks. If you skipped your playtesting, this is going to be way worse. And then the expansion content. Like, I'm done with the game. I'm not going to touch it again. But the problem is you get Steam reviews like this. It's like, it's great, very good, but very short. And then you get more like this with the thumbs down. And everyone's refunding it because they play it for an hour and they're finished. And like, that's cool, I can get my money back. So I made more content. 8 weeks of adding more things to the game to make it long enough that people felt like they were getting their value, their money's worth out of it. And then localization, because it turns out my biggest market's not actually North America, it's not actually Germany, it's China. But people don't really know what they're playing. They love the game, but they don't understand it. So it gets localized into simplified Chinese and traditional Chinese, and German, and Italian, and French, and Spanish, and Portuguese, and Hungarian. 8, 9, 10, 11 languages, they keep getting added on because the more languages there are, the more exposure it gets, and the more people are interested in playing it. And then there's console releases. So when 39 Days to Mars launched on Steam, it did pretty badly. It would have been really easy to leave it there to die. And I could feel good about all the good reviews and the people that loved the game, but it wasn't enough to sustain me. And even the expansion content didn't really make it viable. So here's the breakdown in revenue per platform. I can't say which is which, but one of these is PC, one's Xbox, PS4, Switch. None of them by themselves really, is worthwhile. But all 4 of them together is excellent. So I did the process of porting and releasing on all the consoles the 2 years after launch, and it turned it from a game that was fun, but not an indie success, into a game that lets me continue making games. 8 weeks for basic platform support. Things load differently. You have to support asynchronous disk access. The loading times need to change. The way you package it together to deploy it onto the consoles changes. The controls need to support all the different controllers. The shaders all break on every piece of hardware. So you rewrite all your shaders. And then you port it to a console. So that's just getting it ready. And then you go to the Xbox. And it takes about 12 weeks to make it work. You have to redo all of your store page images because all the sizes are different. You have a completely different checklist of things you need to do before you launch. And then, of course, you need to do the launch support. You need to reply to all your key requests. You need to do your blog posts and your updates and your social media outreach and talk to streamers, fix all the platform-specific bugs. And all of that together, it's several months of work. And then you do it again and again. And yeah, at this point, we're 3.5 years into our 1-year project, and I'm absolutely done. I'm really done. I'm not doing any more work, but I want to make more games, which means I have to make sure that 39 Days to Mars is actually going to keep selling and that people are going to keep enjoying playing it, which means you have to have long-tail strategies. I'm going to cover 2 of these. There's a whole talk in this part. Discounting is incredibly important. This is sales week to week, fairly normally on Steam. And then when it goes on sale, it makes 90% of the money that it's ever made. So you need to know well ahead of time how you're going to discount, how you're going to market your sales, and be aware that in your calculations, you're not getting full price for any of the copies you sell. You also need a way to keep in touch with people that played your game so that when you make a second one, you can reach out to them, tell them you've made a second one. And email marketing is one of the more effective ways to do this. Don't use Twitter. Game developers use Twitter. Gamers don't use Twitter. I integrated my mailing list with features in the game, so if you signed up to the mailing list to get updates, you also got cool hats you could wear while you were playing. Any kind of incentive works. You need people to be excited to get your emails. So all of that takes probably 4 or 5 weeks. And then I'm also releasing in China. This is probably an entire talk's worth of content by itself, again, but it takes a long time, and there's a lot of overhead, and it's like releasing on more platforms again. So all of this together, my 1-year project is now 4 and a bit years. So that's the development of a game. There's lots of little pieces. You know, some of these you know about. Some of these were probably a surprise, like they were to me. But in general, this is why we tend to underestimate how long it takes to make a game. What did we learn? Well, launch is probably halfway in terms of effort, if not time. Making a game is definitely not the same as releasing a game, nor making the game successful. And there's just so many pieces to game development that we tend to forget. So if you've managed to launch a game, then congratulations. And if you're planning to launch a game, I hope you're a bit more prepared for what you're getting into. And good luck. So, do we have time for Q&A? We do.
We have had a couple of questions come in, one of which is, having now experienced releasing on multiple platforms after launch, how would you change your approach if you were planning on multiple platforms during initial development?
Excellent question. So, some of the changes I had to make to support platforms were really hard to do after the fact without breaking a lot of the game. So going into development, knowing you're going to release on future platforms, you need to research what you need to do, and you don't have to support everything out of the box from the get-go, but it really helps to know that you need asynchronous saving and loading, that you need to support multiple controllers, and if you do this, then putting it all in later is way easier. Yeah.
Fantastic. Do we have any questions from the audience? Anyone who wants to speak up as well, please take your time. I believe we are getting some more on the way, chopping and changing.
Yes.
So for your next project, you looked at all these different steps to develop a game. From your learning experience, what will you do differently the next time?
Oh boy. Well, supporting multiple platforms out of the box is definitely one thing. Things that went well were not doing a sim ship, not simultaneously launching on multiple platforms. I'm one person, it was hard enough to do one at a time. So I'll repeat a lot of the things that went well. The outreach and the media, like integration with the newsletter, having a system to reply to streamers and give out keys really helps. Yeah, more or less, most of the same stuff that I managed to accidentally do right the first time around, I'll make sure I do the second time as well. Yes, I'm doing early access second time around.
We have received another question. How did localization differ between languages? Were some easier than others?
Absolutely. I made the mistake of having language-based puzzles in this game. European languages, mostly fine. You just have to add, a few genders to it. Getting it working with Chinese and Japanese was really difficult. It required some redesigning of things. And obviously next time around I'll not do language-based puzzles.
Fantastic. How will your approach change using early access next time?
So the content expansion that I put out was kind of this lump drop of new content that went in after the game. And the rationale used to be that you get a really good media push with new content, but it turns out mostly it's the players who are interested, and they just want little things all the time to keep them engaged and keep them coming back. So early access is a way for me in my new game to really improve things quickly as players report issues or have ideas, and make sure there's something new all the time for people to be excited about.
All right, thank you so much. I think that's enough all the time we have there, but please give a hand for Philip, and if you have any further questions, find him on the floor.
Thanks very much.